Okay, welcome to session number 2 of module 1 of our online training in industry intelligence. It's great to see you all back. So thank you for all attending again today. What we're going to do today is we're going to start to look at the components of an industry intelligence model, how that might look in the Vietnam context. And we're going to look at this a little bit over the next few sessions, and we're going to continue to investigate how a model might be developed for Vietnam. And we'll show you what we do in Australia and how we operate in Australia. And we will ask you to have a think about what the model might look like in the context of Vietnam. Before we start though, a couple of things. I see we've had 10 people respond to complete the baseline survey. So I still need 9 of you who haven't completed that survey to please complete it. It's an online survey. You've received the link. It's 4 questions. It's quite straightforward. So those of you who haven't completed it yet, please do so. I want to start by showing you an image. And can you see the image here of data, information, knowledge on the screen? I want to show you this for a reason, because what we're going to do over the course of our training is really move from the data phase to the insight phase. So if you look at this picture, I apologize that it's in English, but you'll see the top left-hand corner, we have data. It's random, it's unconnected, it's just simply data. But when we start to give it value, as in it has value and meaning, it becomes information. So we move into the next phase, represented by the coloring of the dots. And if we can make sense and understand what the connectivity and relationships are between this information, we start to move into the next phase, which is knowledge. And then if we're able to interpret that information well, we can start to get some insights, which is in the bottom left-hand corner. And we can start to see some of the things that we can do with the data that we've collected. And finally, if we're able, look at that panel in the middle down the bottom, you'll see that we can move into actually making conclusions and findings, and we can actually demonstrate we understand what the data is able to tell us. But if we don't fully understand what the data can tell us, sometimes we can see other things in the data. And if we look at that panel in the bottom right-hand corner, we can see that there's a dragon featured. Someone, in interpreting the data, they've been able to see a dragon. And this is one of the big challenges we have with the process that we're undertaking here. We need to be very careful about interpreting the data and being careful about what we think we're seeing, because it's very easy to see things in the data that you want to see. And that's not our role. Our role is to collect, analyze, interpret, and present. We need to be careful that we don't start to look for things in the data which isn't there. And this is particularly important when we're talking about industry intelligence. So I thought I'd start with that, just to demonstrate that we start with raw data and we move into more sophisticated understanding of the data. But if we don't really understand what it is we're looking at, we're prone to bringing our own biases and assumptions into that analysis. So we want to avoid this because this is where data becomes less valuable and less useful for the purposes that we need it for. All right, let's see if we can start our presentations today. What I want to talk to you about today is I want to talk to you about what is industry intelligence, and we're going to go back to the start. And I know for some of you that were participants in our professional development program, we have covered a little bit of this previously, but I think it's important, since we have newcomers in our training, that we all start on the same basis of understanding. We want to be very clear about what it is that industry intelligence represents. We want to be very clear about what its value is and how we can use it. So let's first of all look at what it is. You know, it's essentially data and information that we can collect from industry and other sources, not just industry, that can tell us about what is happening in the sector, but also not just what is happening in the sector, but what is planned. And when we talk about planning, we're really talking about what capital investment may be scheduled, what changes are occurring in work processes, what technology may be being introduced to change those work processes, and what the skills needs are that are emerging from these changes in work practices. That's essentially what we're trying to understand when we undertake the collection of industry intelligence. We do this because it can help us both understand the operating environment of the logistics sector and the enterprises in that sector, but also that we can predict or use this information to try and predict what the future might hold for some of these activities. So this is particularly important that we understand what's happening now, but we can also use industry intelligence to understand what's expected to occur in the future. We can also use it to look at trends. And as we develop a good industry intelligence model and we repeat and replicate our processes of data collection, over time, we'll start to be able to identify trends. And this is also very valuable for anticipating what changes occurring in the sector might impact on skills development needs, particularly around technology, particularly around work practices and process, and particularly around skills development needs. It's not the only thing that we do. Of course, the other reasons that we do this are essentially around the occupational standards that we've looked at previously. How do we anticipate what those occupational standards might be around job roles and work processes? And as those job roles and work processes change because of the introduction of new systems, new technologies, new work practices, we need to be able to capture that and be clear about how this impacts on the definition of job roles. And those are defined through our occupational standards. Now, we've had the benefit of a number of you undertaking the design and development of occupational standards, so you have a good sense of how occupational standards are developed. But what we didn't do in that program was really think about why. Why have we got these 5 job roles nominated? If you remember, it was at the direction of the LIRC that those job roles were chosen. But on what basis were those decisions made? We don't know, but it would be very interesting to try and disaggregate what the logic was of those 5 designated priority job roles for codification as occupational standards, I think we'll find that this was the result of industry intelligence. I mean, these were not job roles that were selected randomly. There was some basis of logic to this. So I think you'll start to see that, you know, industry intelligence has multiple values and applications. And really what we're talking about here is the collection of both qualitative and quantitative data. We're talking about information that's really giving us knowledge and insight into what's happening in the sector. Why do we do it? Well, we need to maintain the integrity of our occupational standards. Now, as occupational standards become more normalized as tools within the Vietnamese economy, and I think increasingly over time, we shall see a number of new occupational standards developed as their value is appreciated. We're going to ultimately end up with a very large repository of occupational standards. Now, they're not static things. They need to reflect the changes that are occurring in the work environment. So this is how we maintain occupational standards. We use industry intelligence, and that really gives us of what is occurring in the sector. What is it that's happening and how is it reflected? It's really done through industry intelligence shaping the design of occupational standards and the maintenance of those occupational standards. It's particularly important as well to appreciate that industry intelligence is our main driver of the delivery and assessment of training. This is how we understand what it is that we need to develop as training packages. It gives us insights into the skills needs that are emerging at the enterprise level. So industry intelligence gives us the what, the occupational standards, but it also gives us the how. How do we respond to this? How do we develop a training response, a skills development response? We need industry intelligence to give us that direction. It also gives us an insight into the timing and volume of training, and this is the when. So how many new skilled labourers do we need in the logistics sector? How many more warehouse operators? How many truck drivers? How many forklift operators? And when do we need this training to occur? We're trying to match the supply and demand equation in the economy by using industry intelligence. So it really has very important things to tell us about both the type of training that's needed, the how, and the timing and volume of that training. And that's the when. So these are important elements to understand. Let's now look at a couple of other things that we need to be clear about. Why we need it, how it works. We're going to talk about a skills pipeline as well. I'm going to look at this in a second. Well, skills pipelines are really important elements of what we're trying to do here. But we also need to understand who this is for. Who needs this information? Well, it's got value across a number of different stakeholder groups. Clearly, within the sector itself, industry, they're very interested in what's happening within their sector. They can obviously understand within their enterprise the changes that are occurring, but what's happening with our competitors? What's happening across the broader sector? What's happening internationally? What are the external forces that are impacting on how we work? Well, industry intelligence can give us insights into that. Government has an interest in this information and knowledge as well, because government has a policy response obligation to support the training sector, the skills development process. So government has an interest in this information as well. And educators. Educators really need this data to understand and anticipate the design of new training packages, the reform of existing training packages, and approaches to developing skills. If we can disseminate this information across those three groups, then we really do have good coverage, complete coverage of the types of information which is really important for the decision making that occurs in those groups. Now, we talked yesterday about tailoring our presentation and packaging of industry intelligence, and we're going to look at that in a lot of detail in module 3. But I think you can appreciate already that what industry needs in terms of the focus of industry intelligence is probably not the same as what government needs, which is probably not the same for what vet colleges need. There's a different emphasis and insight required within the industry intelligence that we collect. So this is why it's particularly important that we tailor our messaging and our data analysis, our interpretation, to meet the needs of those different groups who have an interest in development of industry intelligence. Look, there's a lot of things that also spin off from industry intelligence. Career development, career pathways, designing appropriate career pathways. People need to understand where the future demand for skills are, where the job opportunities might likely be to emerge in the economy. Well, this is another application and use of industry intelligence. So we are using this not just at a enterprise or training college level, it's also of interest to individuals, and we can package it for individuals. We can package it in career guidance, career counselling, career development. We can tap into these industry intelligence sources to help guidance counsellors, give students the options, the range of options that they need. We need to make sure, though, that whatever we do with this data, it is digestible. People need to understand it. And one of the big challenges in this work is the packaging and presentation of data for the right audiences. So good industry intelligence will always package data into easily consumable and digestible form. And we're going to talk a little bit later about, I'm going to show you a video clip from Mark McKenzie, who is the chair of the Transport and Logistics Industry Reference Committee in Australia. And he really makes a strong point about, I need lots of information, but I need it in an easily consumable form. I'm an executive of a very large organisation, in fact, multiple organisations. I don't have time to read voluminous reports to find the detail. Hey, I want to see the detail, but I want to have the messaging distilled. So what we are tending to do at AIS in the development of our skills forecasts now is make them very brief, very focused, and very graphical. We capture and represent the key messaging through charts, tables, infographics. The main substantial data and detail we attach as annexes. If you're interested and you've got time to wade into the detail and the data, it's there. But the main messages are up front, distilled and focused. And when we look at technical writing in module 3, we'll start to examine this in some more detail, and we'll show you how we do this in Australia, what it looks like, what the products are that we produce. The other thing that we need to be very clear about, and this is something I think takes a little bit of time to appreciate, is that a good industry intelligence model is a 7 days a week, 365 days of the year model. it is ongoing. It's iterative, meaning that it repeats. And our industry intelligence staff in AIS, they are on a daily basis searching, collecting, collating data. Of course, they have very well-established systems over 20 years of development, but it gives you an insight into the intensity of this process. So we've looked at the users. We've got a couple more users. The colleges, training package design. I mean, this really is your connection with industry. This is the connected element of your relationship with industry. I know a lot of colleges that are in our LARC team have well-established partnerships with local industries and have good relationships with local enterprises. But what you don't tend to have is the macro sector-wide picture, the trend analysis, the focus on emerging issues. That's difficult to achieve through the individual partnerships that you've developed at the college level with local enterprises. So this gives you a macro perspective to complement your micro perspective that emerges from these direct relationships. So whilst you may feel that your college has good connections with local enterprises and local industry, what industry intelligence systems can do is bring you a sector-wide perspective. And I think that you'll see has much more value to your needs in terms of designing a training package response than just, I think, maintaining that localized relationship. So this is a complementary element to those localized relationships. There's an element where regulators and outside stakeholders can use industry intelligence to really monitor trends and change occurring in the sector. In Australia, this is particularly important for our regulatory agencies. We have quite a complex regulatory environment in Australia around skills development. You don't have quite as many agencies involved in this process in Vietnam, but I'm sure organisations like DVET and organisations like Morlissa will have real interest in what comes out of a good industry intelligence model. One of the things that we can do with a well-established industry intelligence model is actually use it to map the longitudinal change that's occurring in the sector. So over time, we're able to see trends, we're able to analyse emerging issues, we're able to anticipate, in some cases, emerging issues. So as we develop a repository of knowledge and we build upon that knowledge and we continue to refine, we continue to collect and collate and analyse, we can see over time a trend, if it's there, or we can see over time the changes that are occurring within sector activity. So it has value in that sense as well. I want to show you this chart now because I think this really does give you a sense of how this all fits together. The starting point is really a good industry intelligence system. Everything that flows from a good industry intelligence system gets us to the outcome where we have the matching of skills needs with skills demand. That's the ultimate end goal of this process. We want to take skills identification in the first instance through industry intelligence. That's how we identify what those emerging new skills needs are in the sector or the broader economy. We start with industry intelligence. We move from industry intelligence into the design and development of occupational standards, quality frameworks, policy and governance, policy development, policy rules, governance over the sector. These all emanate from industry intelligence. This is really the foundation stone of everything that we try to do in the sector. We move then into implementation, and that's where the VET colleges develop learning and assessment strategies. That's where, you develop your staffing structures, your staffing plans, your recruitment strategies. It all comes on the basis of that industry intelligence. It helps us identify where those skill gaps are, where we need to be focusing on developing new course material, what modifications we need to be making to existing training courses. This is another important element. This is how we make sure that we don't stand still and miss the emerging opportunities that are occurring through economic change in the sector. And then, of course, we move into delivery. This is another important element. So we have nationally recognised, high quality training and assessment delivered by vet colleges, compliant with the regulatory environment. Well, we designed that because we're responding to identified need. So this is an important understanding of what we call the skills development pipeline. This is essentially the essence of our skills development structure in Australia. Okay. I want to now look at some of the things that we're doing in Australia, and I want to show you something which I think might be of interest to you immediately in development of your model. We use a variety of different sources in Australia. The key point is we're not reliant on one single source of information, and we can't be. We really can't be. This is dangerous. It really does potentially skew our perspective. So there's no single data source that we can draw upon that's going to give us all the information we need. We must use data from a range of credible sources. Now, in Australia, we're lucky in the sense that we do have quite a rich repository of data sources. And in a few moments, I'm going to ask you to think about what you have in Vietnam that could become the basis of an industry intelligence model. We rely a lot on what we call national and subnational quantitative data. The Australian Bureau of Statistics has a very comprehensive data collection system and process, and can give us very rich data broken down by region on what's happening in the economy. This is a very important base source of our industry intelligence models in Australia. In Vietnam, of course, you similarly have national census, you have the General Statistics Office. But I wonder whether the type of data that's being generated from the General Statistics Office has the level of detail and the reliability of the data that we need. I want to pose that question and get you to think about this when we break into our groups shortly, when we look at this issue in detail. We've got a lot of sector reporting in Australia. You don't quite have the same maturity of the sector in terms of the type of documentation and analysis that's being done at this point in time. But in Australia, we have a number of professional services firms, research organisations that are producing documentation on what's happening in the sector. This is commercial product. People pay for it. It has value. So we rely a lot on the secondary research of these data sources. This is a really important element of what we do in our model in Australia. There's also the surveying of employers and other groups. I want to share a bit of an, I guess, secret with you about this. The reality is that we don't use surveys very much in Australia. And if we do use them, we use them for a specific purpose. And the reason that we don't use surveys extensively anymore is because we don't have to. We have such a rich repository of existing data sources that our survey instruments really don't become necessary to tell us what we can source already. But where we do use surveys, we use them in a very specific way. We use them as lead indicators of issues. We use them to identify emerging issues. And then we explore those issues in more detail through other qualitative data collection means, such as focus groups, round tables, expert panels, and forums, industry forums. So we're decreasingly using survey instruments in their own right. In your case, in Vietnam, without the same volume of secondary data sources, survey instruments become much more important to establish a baseline of understanding. Now, if we don't have a good secondary source pool of data, then survey instruments become much more important, at least initially, to establish our baseline of what's happening in the sector. Because one of the values of survey instruments is that we're able to ask questions about what is planned for the future, not just what's happening now. And that's really one of the unique values of the survey tools. We do a lot of desk-based literature research, and we really start with that as the foundation of our research. And when we look at our data analysis methodologies, and I said to you yesterday, we will share with you the methodology that we use at AIS for developing our skills forecasts. When we show you that methodology, you'll see that the starting point of that is literature reviews. We actually start with a literature review, and we use the literature reviews to identify gaps. Once we identify those gaps, we look at other tools, surveys being one option, to find the gap that we need to resolve. We effectively are developing a hypothesis approach to skills and knowledge gaps. So we start with a very strong focus on literature reviews. We're using survey instruments less and less, and we're getting more granular with our focus on data. What I mean by that is we're going down to the level of focus groups, key informant interviews, expert panels, industry forums, to try and explore in much more detail the types of emerging issues that are occurring in the logistics sector. This is the way that we are moving in the Australian model. But we'll look at this in more detail over the next module when we really get into a detailed look at the data collection instruments that we're using in Australia. Now, I include this table for you in our resources, just as a way, I guess, of critically appraising the value of some of these instruments. And I want you to think about this when we do our group work in a few minutes, because I think the cultural differences in some of these instruments and some of these methodologies needs to be understood. Can we rely on good national, subnational statistical data in Vietnam like we do in Australia? Well, I think we've had this discussion before in our professional development program. And I think, in fact, we had representatives in those training sessions from Dorlisa. And, you know, we heard, quite frankly, that there are some challenges in the reliability, the consistency of national statistical data. So maybe that's not a source that has the same value in the Vietnam model that it would have in the Australian model. Mixed methods models of data collection, well, very popular and certainly the mainstay of what we do in Australia. But subjectivity, inconsistencies are always a challenge with this data. We also look at surveys, and we've talked about the survey tool. That's how we get direct user input. if we can ensure that the survey instruments are actually completed by the right people, and this is another challenge, they can be inconsistent, they can be subjective. We need to be very careful about the questioning that we use, the type of questions that we pose, the ordering of the questions, really influential in surveys, the ordering of your questions. We've got some, I guess, tips about that, which we'll talk to you about. Kevin O'Leary, when he does his presentation tomorrow, we'll be talking to you about that. And next week, when we look at survey instruments in much more detail, Kevin will join us again. Kevin's our resident expert on these instruments, and he has some very, I guess, firm views about what could work in Vietnam and what might be more problematic. There is actually another mechanism we use where, look, just before we finish from this table, focus groups and key informant interviews and roundtable discussions, industry forums, they're becoming increasingly important as a means of data collection, but also data validation. We use these tools both for data collection and validation. And I think you already have in your NESCN and emerging model some of these elements. Think about the LARC, what that represents in itself, with the number of experts and industry representatives and vet college representatives that are on that panel. I think what's happening now in LARC meetings is actually a source of data intelligence that's being generated. We just need to make sure that we can capture it and understand it. And at the moment, I think maybe we're missing a little bit of those opportunities. So we'll talk more about that when we get into the detail around our collection methodologies next week. Look, I wanted to share with you something else that we do in Australia, which I think is actually quite interesting. And I did a bit of research on this over the course of developing our program here. And I discovered that there's a service that operates in Vietnam, which is similar to the model that we use in Australia. I want to show you this screen here. This is an organization called Meltwater. And Meltwater do what's called media monitoring. They monitor media sources and collect information about what's happening. And you can ask or subscribe to these services to get them to collect particular data that you're seeking. Now, for example, in Australia, we use Meltwater at AIS as a media monitoring source. And we say to Meltwater, we want you to collect every speech that's given by the Minister for Vocational Education where he mentions skills demand or where he mentions labour shortages. And Meltwater will collect all media sources where those data parameters occur, and we'll get them in a consolidated form. Now, this is a company that exists in Australia. It operates this media monitoring service. You can tailor the type of information you want from them, but there's actually an equivalent service that is operating now in Vietnam. And I'll show you this service as well. In fact, I'll also type down in our chat function the address of this particular company, their website address. But let me just get the screen up first, because this service actually operates in Vietnam. And they actually have a Vietnamese language website, which is fantastic. So I'll share with you the actual details about this, because you may find that this is something that you can actually start to look at immediately as a service. And I'll just get it up in Vietnamese. I have a feeling they may have done the Vietnamese translation through a automated service, because I just sense some of the language is a little bit strange, but you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. But this is a company called Incentia. Incentia is a media monitoring company. I'll write the email, I'll write the address in our chat column, and you can have a look at this yourself. But this is essentially a media monitoring service. It allows you to really tailor information sources that you need. It does something very interesting these days though. And if I tap on this, read more about media monitoring, and I get it up in Vietnamese again, I think you'll see something interesting here. This is a very comprehensive service. It does things that, I guess, cover the whole spectrum of media sources. They do something called social listening. And that means that they're actually watching and collating data from non-traditional media sources. Social media, blogs, communities of practice forums. They are able to collate and collect data from both traditional media sources and non-traditional media sources. And I think that's, you know, particularly interesting from this perspective, that you've got a service available in Vietnam immediately now that can give you a source of collated, aggregated data, saving a lot of time and really allows you to, you know, understand what's being said in the marketplace, in social forums, in public forums. So this is something you may wish to think about when we get to thinking about what the model needs to look like. And I'll just send that link to you now via chat. So you've got the web link to have a look at that site in more detail. Look, what I want to do now is break into groups. And I want to ask you a couple of questions to talk about within your groups. Thinking about what components of an industry intelligence model might work in Vietnam, what elements of the Australian model that I've briefly shown you, and we'll look at this in much more detail next week, but what elements of that model that we use in Australia might not be appropriate, and what other data sources might there be in Vietnam that we haven't touched on, that we don't practice necessarily in Australia, but might have value as a data source in Vietnam. Now, we're going to visit this question a number of times over the course of our modules. We're going to keep refining and developing this question as we expand our understanding of what these options are, how they can be constructed. So I want you to start today with thinking about those two fundamental questions. Which of these data collection sources would be appropriate as part of an LIRC industry intelligence model? Question one. And question two, are there other data sources that we haven't talked about and included? Now, let's break you into our breakout rooms. We've allocated you into rooms and you will get, I think, 4 or 5 people in each team. So I think we've got about 4 teams set up. We're going to use the breakout rooms. I want you to have a discussion for about 10 minutes. Let me see if I can get this to work. So we've got the breakout rooms, we've created them. We've got the allocations, which is great. I'm going to open the rooms now. And you've been invited to join your breakout rooms. So I hope you've got that message to join your breakout rooms. So please go and join these rooms. And we'll come back in 10 minutes time and have a discussion about what you've concluded.
Darren, it's Pascal. Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. Just will I join the breakout room number 4, or do you just want to leave it for the groups?
I think just leave it for the groups.
Sure.
Let's leave it for the groups. Have you been allocated into a room? Looks like you have. No.
I have, but that's okay. I have into breakout room 4, but I can.
So it's automatically done that because you were unassigned, Pascal.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
No worries.
So
Look, let's no drama with that. You don't need to join the rooms, Pascal.
Sure.
We'll leave our Vietnamese colleagues to do their work, and then we'll convene. Now, look, after we hear back from them, I'll hand over to you, Pascal, to do your presentation.
Great.
So I can, I'll assign you host rights. In fact, if I can do that now, let me see. I can make you the co-host. I'm going to make you the co-host now. So you're the co-host. So you should be able to launch your presentation. If there's any dramas, I've got access to it too. So we should be right. But you've got your slides to do your case study, which
I do, ready to go, and I have just the case study aspect. So just working from there, because you've covered everything else pretty much.
Good. All right.
That's great.
Right.
Darren, you can also broadcast a message to all if you want to get them to come back to.
Yes, good.
Yeah.
Just saw that. Thanks. That's a good idea.
Yeah. That should be it from me.
So Rachel, they essentially just check out of the room, do they, and come back? Well,
yeah.
I can close the rooms, can't I?
You can close the rooms, yeah.
Yeah. Good. Thanks. No, that's great. Look, thanks a lot for your help. You've done a great job again. This has worked well. Now, just one question. Will these same breakout room groups stay for, perfect.
Yeah, because it's a reoccurring invite, it'll stay pre-assigned.
That's perfect. You've done a great job. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah.
That's great. See you, Rachel.
All right, bye-bye. Sorry, Darren. Can you just share the questions, broadcast the questions for them? Is there a way of doing that, or?
Yeah.
Although it would be in English, won't it?
Yeah, I have to turn my scriptwriter on to try and write Vietnamese.
Yeah, just in case I forgot. So Leanne said in her group they were just trying to remember exactly what they were commenting on.
It's okay. Look, as I said, we're going to do this many times. This is really an incremental development of understanding about how we do this. So I appreciate they may not have picked up the nuances of this at this point, but we're going to ask the same question next week and we're going to look at it again the following week. So this will be an evolution of growth. And if they haven't understood the question yet, that tells us something in itself. So there's no drama with that. I appreciate I probably should have written these down somewhere.
Pascal. Yeah, all good. All right, cool. Thanks very much. I've just noticed that we've got one participant under Galaxy A71.
That's Mr. Munn.
Okay, should I assign him to a room?
Yeah, assign him maybe to that room 1, which has got 3 people in it at the moment. Yeah, that'd be handy.
All right, no worries. Cool.
Do I need to assign you as the host again for that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I made you the host. Okay, you're the host now.
All right, cool. Thank you. Done.
Beautiful. Good on you.
So you can take that back now.
So you'll transfer the host back to me.
Oh, right. I've got, yeah, sorry. I've got to do it from my end.
You're doing great. Don't you love Zoom? We're learning as we go.
There we go. Now, and you make host. Yes, there we go.
Great. Very good.
All right, good. All right, I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Good on you.
Bye.
Okay, very good. I'm seeing that people are now returning from their breakout rooms, which is great.
Because you, because your technical methods, we have to break.
Well, who's surprised to hear that? Anyway, we'll struggle on, Mr. Hyde. You know what you're dealing with me. We'll get better at this. Let me tell you, we're going to keep doing this because I want to keep asking this same question. Because as we evolve over the next 7 remaining sessions, we're going to try and get to the answer of this question. As we increase our understanding of what the data collection options may be, as we increase our discussion and have those discussions around what might work best in Vietnam, we're going to start to distill which of these data collection processes are going to work in a Vietnamese context. Just because they work in Australia doesn't mean they're going to work in Vietnam. So we need to be very clear about what capacity we have to administer these types of data collection instruments, what skills we need to develop for these type of instruments, and maybe what alternative instruments there may be in the Vietnam context that we're not using in Australia. That's what we're really trying to get to. So I'm going to ask you to think about these questions again. What works in Australia that might work in Vietnam? And what are you able to use in Vietnam that we don't use in Australia? These are some of the things we'll explore. Now, we had 5 groups in our breakout rooms. Can I ask someone from group 1 to just tell us very briefly, just in 1 minute, what your main thinking was on those questions?
Group 1 là group của em đấy đúng không ạ? Em quên mất là group của em là group nào. Hình như là chắc là em sẽ thay mặt group 1 để trình bày về các cái thảo luận của nhóm của em, bởi vì liên quan đến nguồn dữ liệu nào phù hợp để LIRC thu thập cho thông tin ngành á, thì LIRC là cái hội đồng tư vấn kỹ năng nghề cho ngành logistics.
Tại vì anh bị mất không dịch được. Được rồi.
Well, LIRC
Okay.
is a secretary for logistics. Well, VCCI is a secretary for LIRC. So as you presented, you will get the macro data from the national level. For example, the national development programs for logistics. So we need to, for example, our focus on exports, for example, and that might have some effects on the development of the same on the whole sector, and therefore affects the human capital development. And next is the development reports. In the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Industry and Trade, so the economic development for the 2 sectors are very important. So these are the 2 sources the LIRC need to collect. And also we need some data from NGO and international donors. For example, the ADB or the World Bank Group, or the development projects from funded by different donors, and the reports from the academies in Vietnam, for example, VLI, and also the forecast reports from VLI, from the marine associations, from the transport association, so on and so forth. And these are very important reports. And the characteristics of Vietnam is that logistics is dominated and driven by the key players. Therefore, the giants corporations in Vietnam may issue their own report. In the LIRC, we have the representative of Saigon Newport or Tân Cảng. So we try to collect the report from Tân Cảng as a very important source and reliable source of data, very good data for the reference, for reference of industry intelligence. And logistics in Vietnam is linked with the global chain. So we might think of the new emerging trends from neighboring countries in ASEAN or China, or in the market that we have trade relationship with. We can get the information from the reports, international reports, international journals. So these are some of the sources that LLC can collect. And because the LLC report has its own purpose to serve our own agenda, so besides these sources of information, if we need anything else, we can develop a survey, or we can design a research to collect the target data that we want to work with. And so we think that within just 10 minutes, we can think of several sources of data. We have one guy from Vietnam Shipping Gazette, so they can help us to collect the journals and the articles. So this is the discussion results of Team 1. Thank you so much.
Look, that's very good, Ning, and congratulations to Group 1. Look, I really like your thinking here. You are clearly aware of multiple different sources of data that you have access to. This is very helpful to understand that you've got access to direct company reports. I think that's really important. We haven't talked about that specifically, but if you're able to tap into company data, company material, that's really very valuable. And the other sources that you talked about, I think, are really appropriate for the type of model we're trying to build here. And I was interested to hear the mention of donors, and you're right, the World Bank, GIZ, they've done a lot of work in this sector. There's a lot of very interesting reporting being produced, particularly by GIZ. So yes, you're right, donors are another important source. So look, you've definitely highlighted, I think, a number of valuable sources that we could say could form the basis of an industry intelligence model for the LARC. Can I ask someone from the second group, which we had Ms. Hue and Ms. Zhang from Vietnam Shipping Gazette and Ms. Quang, anyone, Mr. Phuc as well, anyone like to speak on behalf of that group? Just very briefly, if you've got something different to say to the points that Ning has already raised.
Em có ý kiến ạ.
Okay, so I think Ning's contribution is very comprehensive. I just want to add that's the information we received from FDA in Vietnam, because their perspective, so FDI, yeah, their perspective also they have a new perspective, the additional perspective forecast about the future of logistics in 10 years, in 5 years, and based on available sources of enterprises, or from the third party. Yeah, so it's very worth using and worth looking at. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good, Zhang. Look, another good point that you make there. Look, you're right. Key point here. Businesses are not standing alone. They're doing their own forecasting. They're doing their own long-term planning. We need to be able to tap into that information. Of course, some of it has commercial sensitivity attached to it. And we're going to look at the ethical issues around data collection when we move into the next modules next week. But, and this is a constant challenge that we have when we talk about industry intelligence, is being careful about the commercial nature of some of the information that we're seeking. But Zhang, I think, makes a very good point about companies have long-term planning. So being able to tap into those sources of information can give us some real insights into how they view the market. So this is a good point. Well done, Zhang. breakout room 3, we have Mr. Bao, we may have Dr. Hua, and Ms. Vic Thurm. Would someone like to, again, just add any other points that we haven't had covered so far?
Xin chào tất cả mọi người, xin chào thầy Darren. Thì thực sự là
Okay,
bạn
so
Ninh.
good morning, Darren and everybody. I think that Ning, what she has said now just made us become, you know, nothing else, because she's like, on behalf of the whole participant, has shared a comprehensive list of sources. But fortunately, we have tried our best to add something new. So one of that is, we have mentioned for the institution when we develop our curriculum based on MOLISA and MOET. So when we want to develop the curriculum, we have to refer to the industry information sources, and the information we have, we organize a forum or workshops inviting enterprises or employers who usually employ our students, and the employers or enterprises who have a great need for human resources in logistics. So we base on that, we organize workshops, and they come and then we consult with them, kind of consultation workshop. And the second way we do it is that we will get input from students, from the graduates, to see, you know, the knowledge, the skills they obtain from the university, how they use it in the real world, and what they feel is missing there in doing their work. And one more source, it is surveying enterprises which have been recruiting graduates from our institution, because they are the one who use our students, and they know, you know, what is good, what works, what doesn't work. And one more thing, it is surveying the lecturers, the lecturer who directly teach the students in logistics, because we want to change the curriculum, we want to adjust the curriculum, we also have to need the approval from the leaders of the colleges, of the vocational training institutions. And one more source that we have been doing quite well in Vietnam, that is in the past year, Oxford Skills or VCCI Logistics VLA organized a lot of workshops, forums, and the information from those workshops are very valuable information, because in those workshops, the participants come from different sectors, come from enterprises, come from state management agencies, from training institutions. So we base on the outputs of the workshops to write the reports. So thanks to the efforts and support of Voice for Skills and VCCI. So a lot of those workshop reports has been used for different purposes. Thank you.
Very good, Dr. Hua. Look, very interesting what you say about your longitudinal tracking of students. I think that would classify as a validation loop. And I think that's actually an important validation loop that we can look at to try and test whether the information that we're receiving actually has credibility. So I think what you've got there to the Institute, it's actually a very good micro model for the validation elements of the data collection processes. And I think we can use that and incorporate that into a comprehensive industry intelligence model as part of our validation, testing that the skills that are being developed and the student application of those skills actually matches the workplace needs. And we know that because they either get jobs or they don't, or they get employed in their area of expertise or they don't. So you've got a very useful longitudinal mapping system developed there, which I think we can see would have benefit as a validation exercise. In group 4, we had Mr. Hai, we had Ms. Zhang from VCCI, and Mr. Tuan. So would one of you like to say anything additional to what we've heard. If there's nothing that you've got to add, that's fine. We'll move on. It's not compulsory to have to think up something to say. So please, can someone say a word from that group?
Dạ, xin chào thầy và các anh chị.
Okay, so good morning, Darren and everyone.
Trang cứ nói trước đi em, cứ trao đổi đi.
Dạ, xin chào thầy và các anh chị. Thì như hồi
Okay,
nãy
so good morning. So we have discussed in 10 minutes to the first question. The thing that like the censuses, the data are outdated. The data from the consensus. So, for example, the latest census was released in 2015. So we think that when we use data from the census, the data will be outdated. So we would rather use the census from the industrial reports. And we also, for the primary data, we will use questionnaires, we will use focus group discussions, and for secondary data, we will use literature review. So in response to question number 2, we would like to add some other sources. For example, the KPIs from enterprises of inventory, or for example, the ship of orders, accuracy. So based on that, we see what kind of adjustment should be put in place, and what is the skills are needed to supplement the skills, existing skills of the human resources. Okay, so I would like to add some more points. I think some data, I think, quite difficult to have. And today we have a Dr. Hua and we have a VCCI, so I want to ask you. So because now we use the stamp confidential, but I think the use of that stamp sometimes is quite easy and doesn't follow any principles. So I think I know that we have a decree. The Vietnamese government has decree regulating which kind of document, which kind of document can use the confidential stamp. So I think the technical working team, the data about logistics, some colleges can use some free sources, but when we want really technical information, then the technical group, working group will step by step conduct research and collect data and then provide later. Thank you.
Very good. Look, Ms. Chung, I think you made an excellent point there with your comments about the limitations of national statistical data and census data. You're right. And the thing, we'll talk about this in more detail next week when we look at the national statistical data sources in more detail. But yes, there are some real limitations with the Vietnamese census data. There's limited data parameters around industrial activity, and I think that really limits its usefulness for what we want. And you make a good point. This is lagging data. These are lag indicators. They are showing us what happened through the rear vision mirror rather than what we can see ahead of us. So you're right. Look, I think Mr. Hai makes a very good point too about commercial in confidence and commercial information. We do have an issue with this. We're going to talk about this when we talk about the ethics of data analysis next week and the week after, because there are some ethical issues we need to consider about the type of information we're likely to come across. But there's some very good points there. I really do think your sophistication of understanding of the question is really good. So I'm pleased with that. One more group, and can we just ask someone from group 5 that had Miss Hương in it, Miss Kim An, Miss Thuy, and Mr. Tuan. Please, can I just keep it very brief because we have our guest speaker ready to go
Dạ,
next.
dạ chào dạ em là Tuấn trường cao đẳng.
Okay, Tuấn speaking from Thủ Đức Technology College. So we are group 5 and we are the most disadvantaged group because the previous group have taken the golden opportunities to say all we want to say. So anyway, talking about the data collection in Vietnam, there are various sources. But the existing sources in Vietnam are, scattered, and there's no connection, interrelation or interconnection among those sources. So I think the important point is that we have to identify the stakeholders in information or industry intelligence model. Which stakeholders are involved in that model, and how we can connect the information among various resources so that the information we have, each sources of information is not standalone, but it is like interrelated and interconnected. Yeah, thank you.
Very good points, Mr. Tuan. Thank you very much for those comments. Look, I think you make a very good point. This is going to be the challenge. Where do we find the data? How reliable is it? Can we trust it? What's it related to? What's its relationship in terms of its connections to other issues and sources? So these are really good points and good critical analysis of the challenges that we're facing. And also, Mr. Tuan, thank you for your comments in Group 5. I'll make sure that Group 5 goes first next time, so you'll be the first to speak next time we get a chance. So look, thank you very much for your efforts there. I really do think there's some very interesting comments made there. We're going to keep exploring this question. As we show you more and more of the Australian model and the layers and elements to it, we're going to revisit this question. And by the end of our 9th session together, I hope we can have a consensus and agreement around what the shape of an industry intelligence model might be that we could employ for the LARC. Okay, enough from me. I'd like to now hand over to my colleague, Mr. Pascal Summers. And look, he is an industry expert from AIS. He's got a lot of experience in the education sector. He comes from an education background. He's been on both sides of the fence. So he's got a very interesting and different perspective to many of us. And he has responsibility for the aviation IRC within AIS. So we're going to look at a case study that Pascal has developed about how industry intelligence is used to shape development in that sector. So I won't say any more. I'll hand over to Pascal now and welcome him as our first guest speaker for our program.
Thank you, Darren, and hello, everybody. And thank you for having me as a guest speaker today. And I'm delighted to be here and to discuss Australian industry intelligence model. As a brief background, as Darren said, I've been working in the vet sector since 2004. And I spent most of that time in vocational teacher education. And my work focused essentially on the actual use of training packages, or what you refer to as occupational standards, and in the design, delivery, and assessment of training. And in particular, my work involved direct on-site location training with various industries. So that was an exciting aspect of my work. It was actually working on-site with industry to use occupational standards in the training of their staff, and in particular making sure that their trainers were fully trained to make sure that the occupational standards and the industry standards were maintained to a high level. So today I'm going to present very shortly on a case study and how the industry intelligence aspects contributed to the success of the project. So I'd like to talk to you a little about that, and I will share my screen now with you. Okay. So hopefully you can see that. Now, is that visible to everybody? Hopefully so.
Yes, thank you.
That better, great. Well, so the first aspect was that this was a project which involved a new piece of equipment. You, I'm sure, have gone through airport security many times and have had to put your baggage, your hand baggage, on the screening and scanning machine. So the new piece of equipment that came into focus for this industry, for airport security screening, was a new piece of equipment. So it gave the capacity and the ability of this machine to actually look at hand baggage in 3D. So it was a very exciting innovation. So I'm going to speak to you a little bit on this new piece of technology and the data sources that we used to make sure that the project was on track and that it would be a success in the end. So I'm sure that you have read the case study that I prepared and presented to Darren for the purposes of this presentation. But it was essentially that I was a skills specialist. I work with in aviation and defense, so this project came under my brief. And it started probably in early 2018 when we had done a range of surveys as part of our skills forecast initiative. And as Darren said, the surveys will reveal a certain picture and a broader spectrum indication that things were going to happen, that the aviation industry was going to require new technology and therefore staff would need to be trained on this new technology. But we weren't sure what exactly that would be. And so it, as Darren says, it often sends up a flag. It gives us an indication, it gives us a broad focus. And we then underwent a process to investigate that further. So we had already determined for the surveys and industry forums that the aviation industry was looking at new technology, and the story would develop over the next year in terms of the research and the meetings we had with various industry professionals to ensure we had all the facts. Now, you will have maybe watched these already, and I think I'll save a little bit of time in terms of showing the videos just in case, but particularly this second video here that you'll watch, but essentially the manager that's interviewed in this particular news interview was at an airport called Avalon, which is south of the main airport in Melbourne. And the manager suggests that the latest equipment is very important. So this smaller airport, regional airport, attained international airport status, and therefore wanted to make sure that they had the latest equipment installed in their airport. So they already had 2D scanning equipment, but were upgrading to the new 3D scanning equipment. Staff members interviewed compared the two systems already. So whilst people were not formally trained on the new piece of equipment, the senior, most experienced screeners were used to operate this new piece of equipment, essentially operating from the manufacturer's instructions, which is not a perfect model, but it is a model which gives people at least a start until the training is formalized. This new equipment had great advantages in terms of less maintenance. It had it was adaptable to emerging threats, not just current threats that might happen. It allows for artificial intelligence aspects, and the manager is very keen to promote the airport's future, and it's all about growth and being cost effective and efficient. So this new piece of equipment presented a very exciting opportunity for this regional airport. Now, the equipment was already being trialed at Melbourne Airport and Perth Airport, but this smaller airport was actually skipping the trial and going directly to the implementation. Another aspect of data that we used to confirm and to build on the story from the surveys and the focus groups was industry publications. As Darren indicated in his presentation, the importance of meltwater and systems to scan media and publications for alerts and for more evidence on what is growing and what is actually being emphasized in industry. So it gathers, it adds more pieces to the jigsaw puzzle. It gives us a better picture of what is happening. And not just, any publications, but you can focus down on industry publications and you can get a sense of what is happening. So there's some shots there, as you can see, from various industry meltwater sources about news articles about the trial of this equipment happening around the country. And of course, as with the trial of any new equipment, as you know, in industry, that can have its challenges and its ups and downs. But essentially, this gave us an even greater picture about what was happening. And industry publications form a really strong evidence piece on this. Now, probably the most exciting aspect is, for me personally, as a skills specialist, we go to conferences, but particularly this conference, which is the Australian Airports Association. This is the event. It's like the Academy Awards of the aviation industry, where not just awards being given out, but it's a collection of the most prominent and important industry professionals all gathered in one space and in one place over a few days, where you can go and gather information about new technology and the emergence of new equipment. So it was actually, there was a little side presentation as part of this big conference of a manufacturer who brought the equipment to the conference, and we could actually see and talk to one of the main manufacturers about this piece of equipment. And so my role as a specialist is to network, to ask questions, but more importantly, to listen to all the information and network, take notes, and report on my findings. So I would have lots of notes and answers to questions that I would in turn bring back to AIS and report on my findings. Again, adding more picture, a more complete picture to this story that was evolving. So the occupational standard looked like this was going to happen, and to ensure that the security staff are trained to a high level operating this new piece of equipment. So the development stage began not long after this. This added a very important piece to the puzzle. So as this case study proves, several indicators contributed to the industry intelligence that new equipment was about to be launched across Australian airports, and that staff would require training. So projects are expensive to run. We are funded by the Australian government to undertake the development of occupational standards. So we have to be very clear and very sure that the information we have from the surveys, from forums, from conferences, from media, and more importantly, from actually talking to industry, that this would all culminate in our the skills forecast for 2019, which actually put this very clearly in our skills forecast. And if you hadn't had a look at our skills forecast, you can actually see the section in there which related to the 3D tomography scanning project. And as you can see in the small diagram there, it is essentially about triangulating the data so that you've got a very clear picture, and this provides us as AIS with the assurance and the evidence that we can present to the government that this project is essential and that the development of an occupational standard for security screening at the airport would go ahead. So we were very excited that that happened, and of course as the project grew, and we can talk about this in later sessions about that development aspect, but essentially this part of the story confirms that the data was correct, we had correlated it, and that we could present that to the government very confidently. As you can see, one of my best parts, I think, of the project was actually going on site to Avalon Airport as part of the development to meet with key individuals. So as you can see, Avalon Airport, and there is the new piece of equipment. And as part of the development, I did a site visit to look at the machine in action, because we were already about part of the way through the development of the occupational standard. But I'm not a professional in this area, but I assist in the writing of the technical aspect of the occupational standard. But this gave me great insight into how the machine works. Ask questions, look at the actual machine in action, and more importantly, to reconnect personally with managers and operators, so that they get a sense of what's happening behind the scenes. Very often, they would not have that direct connection with the developers of the occupational standards. So this visit brings everything into a nice circle and offers continued and future relationships, so that if there are any future and additional changes to this equipment, that I can actually have someone that I can call directly, or that they can call me directly as a point of contact to let me know further initiatives and innovations that may happen in the industry. So building networks is a very important aspect of my role. And so essentially, that is the presentation. It's part of the story, but hopefully it gives you a sense of how the data and the industry intelligence contributed to this project. Each situation, as Darren indicated, is different, and that sometimes you will have to use different sources of data. Some will be appropriate in one situation, and some may not be. It's also, as I think I've worked with Ning on this in training needs analysis, that whatever methods you use, it's good to have a triangulation, something that confirms and validates, as Darren said, the data that you're gathering. So thank you for the opportunity to present my short story today on industry intelligence, and happy to answer any questions you may have today, or I'm also very happy to address any questions through Darren or on my email. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bashal. That's a very, I think, very interesting and practical demonstration of how industry intelligence shapes change, shapes investment, shapes decision-making within, you know, a very important sector of the economy, a sector of the economy that has, you know, very high level focus on safety and integrity of the products that they use. So this is a really critical, you know, process. And I think the thing I would say that Pashal's presentation has really, I think, emphasized is, you know, if you look at this case study, you see it as a process. It's a process of evolution, of knowledge, aggregation, development of strategies and responses. And it's all driven by the insights that are gained through industry intelligence collection. It's refined through that process. So we need to think about industry intelligence as an ongoing process, like a cycle of activity. But I think what Pashal's given us is a very interesting insight into a practical application of industry intelligence, how it's actually been applied. And Pashal, as he mentioned, has developed a case study paper, which is in our SharePoint repository. It's got a lot of links, web-based links in that document, so you can actually go and look at how this process actually unfolded in more detail. A couple of those YouTube clips that Pashal referred to, I think, are worth having a look at. They're media-based clips, and you know, it's got some very interesting perspectives on it. And I think you know, Pashal emphasizes this, that this is an evolving process. We build data and information, we increase our understanding, we respond accordingly. So again, it's a process, it's an evolving process. So let me open it up now. Would anyone like to ask any questions about Pashal's presentation? Anyone have any comments they'd like to make about anything that Pashal said? If you do, please, this is the chance now.
Darren, may I?
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Xin chào anh Pashan Sommer.
Yeah, good morning, Pashal, Mr. Pashal Sommer. And I learned a lot from your presentation on the informations regarding the industry intelligence on aviation. So my question for you is that, to my understanding, aviation has different requirements on the technical side, and the aviation has some requirements from IATA. So in the industry intelligence, do you collect the data from IATA or any information or intelligence from the international organization?
A very good question, and that I think what we've been talking about today has been the aspect of domestic intelligence gathering aspects, and aviation, of course, is both domestic and global, and that part of our data gathering is to liaise with and connect with data from global sources. So, for example, IATA, and to connect in there. Very important that you bring that aspect of when we write occupational standards, that there is also an eye on how aviation professionals comply with regulations, both in Australia, but also comply with regulations if they travel internationally. Lucky for me, part of our technical advisory committee group, so these are the technical experts in aviation who help me design the occupational standards, that we usually have a representative from CASA, who is the aviation regulator in Australia, and that they will help keep an eye on and ensure that the occupational standards, where they're relevant, will comply with other and align with international standards as well. So lucky for me, I don't have to be an expert on that, but I ensure that if there are any correlating standards that have to be met internationally, that these are written into the occupational standard as well. Thank you for that great question.
Yeah, very good question, Dr. Hua, and very pertinent, because as Pashal has outlined, we can't be developing occupational standards in isolation from the external environment, particularly in a sector like aviation, which has so much interdependency, national and international interdependency. So the point you raise is actually a very good one. And I guess it goes to how far do we look? How broadly do we look for this data sources and information that can inform our decision-making within the sector? Our international and external forces are particularly important to consider. And in logistics, of course, it's an international business. We're dealing with, in many cases, Vietnam being a component of an international supply chain. So there are very important external considerations that we need to take into account. Mr. Hai, I see you have your hand raised. You would like to ask a question?
Yes. Xin phép tôi nói bằng tiếng Việt để cho các đồng nghiệp.
May I speak Vietnamese? Yeah. Well, I'm very interested in your presentation because, there are many interesting points. When we understand the technology, the new technology, we will shorten the training journey. And then in Vietnam, when we have new machines and we have new technology, I have 20 years of working in aviation in Tan Son Nhat Airport, so I understand the importance of technology. So can you share a little bit more about, you said it already, but can you elaborate your comments on logistics? Which aspects of logistics should we monitor for new technology? And how can we monitor the new emerge of technology? Because logistics, we are talking in a broad sense. So what aspect should we focus on to find new technology, new trends? Over.
Yes, it's thank you for that great question as well. It's technology is continually evolving, and when I talk to people in the industry, and of course I'm sure you are as well, that the technology that is proposed for airports is going to ensure that almost a passenger will get out of the taxi at the airport and be able to walk almost without stopping all the way through to boarding the aircraft. And so in terms of logistics, and it's very interconnected, you know, airport is almost like a hive of activity, and interconnectivity and logistical challenges and interlogistical aspects where technology will be used to assist with that aspect. So it does present interesting challenges for us. Again, how do we monitor that is again through continual research, continual attendance at conferences, speaking to airport professionals, to get a sense of what is actually going to happen in the next, because as you know, technology can present a very broad overview and exciting opportunities that are going to happen, but actually what is actually going to happen in the foreseeable future that is actually going to be implemented rather than something that's aspired to, that we would like to do. So again, it's as Darren indicated, it's important to refine the data, to try to find out and correlate what is actually going to be implemented in the short term. So one of the things for aviation in Australia with the challenges of COVID is how screening of passengers for health is going to be impacted, and how staff are going to be trained in that aspect. For us at AIS in occupational standards design and development, we have to be, in one sense, patient and not jump too soon, because that would be reactionary rather than respond to the logistical aspects. So it's really in answering your question, it's about listening to industry about and correlating what is actually going to happen, and then confirm that data again, just like the case study model. It would be very similar to that. It'd be making sure, talking, validating the data, and then triangulating that, and then present that evidence to the government. The government again will look at that evidence and approve the project. So many experts look at the evidence before we actually get the green light to proceed with the project, which is a good thing. It means that it's based on needs as opposed to wants. I hope that has answered your question a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hyde. That's a great question. And again, these are really, you know, I think the right questions to be asking about for Charles' presentation. You know, Dr. Hua's question about the international connectivity of aviation technologies and processes. These are really important to consider. And when we're developing occupational standards, as Bashal has said, you know, we do need to be mindful of their relationship to other jurisdictions and standards. And we've seen this in the development process that we undertook during the professional development program. we looked at the referencing of the occupational standards that we designed against international standards, benchmark standards. We actually looked at examples from Europe, from the European Union. And we can see the coding that's used, the common coding that's used for these types of occupational standards. So aviation, logistics, they're global businesses. They're interconnected globally. So those relationships are very important to understand when we're looking for sources of intelligence. We're looking to frame an occupational standard design which meets our domestic needs, but also has the ability to enable labour mobility, both transnationally and internationally. And that's really the importance of considering those external factors in elements of design of our occupational standards. All right.
If I could add as well to it's also triggered another thought in terms of that transportability of ideas, because one of the things we're trying to do more and more of now, and industry is very interested in this, and the government is very interested in this, is having a set of common competencies that can be used across a range of industries, and that in undertaking qualifications, the core units, occupational standards, will form the basis of a common technical capacity and general capabilities in operating in a particular role, and then completing specialist aspects that would be more relevant to their particular role. So I think we're going to see more of that in the future. For example, the aspect of cyber security, for example, is becoming more and more prevalent, and that's something we're keeping an eye on, is the ability for core areas of cybersecurity, but that cybersecurity will mean and be practical depending on the role you have at the airport, for example. So someone working at a very practical level, working on the ramp outside, will have cybersecurity that relates to his world or her world. But then somebody operating in technological and data analysis and metrics will have a much higher aspect of capacity in cybersecurity. So this aspect of layering and having core areas and then specializations will give employees that capacity to work across their industry without having to complete a whole new set of competencies. So their core abilities will always be good, and then they can specialize.
Thank you, Pashal. Any other questions while we have Pashal here? Anyone like to raise anything else?
Hey, gentlemen, I see some questions in the chat box. Okay, I have questions from Mr. Tuấn from TKC.
Em có một cái câu hỏi là đối với cái...
So I have a question regarding the aviation industry, and the aviation industry requires strict regulations and also very strict compliance. And the people working in the aviation industry must have some certificate, must have some certain certificate. So my question is that for this to respond to the strict regulations and requirements in aviation industry, so how often do you gather or do you collect data to update the industry intelligence in order to change or to update the occupational standards? So how often do you collect the data?
Again, yes, that's a great question. Thank you for that. And that's actually something we look at very closely. That data is, as been spoken about before, it's not a static aspect. It's continually, data keeps presenting itself on a continual basis. So in terms of me in aviation, for example, or in defense, where a lot of things are happening as well, and regulations, as you say, keep changing or updating. Data for me comes in a number of sources. So I get the CASA regulator updates that happen, and they are continually coming in. So for example, I was reading this morning about new regulations that are going to come into effect for drone work and for drone users and registration of users for the use of drones. So that is one of the big growing industries in Australia and of course globally. So data presents itself through the regulator's website because when it actually gets published by the regulator, that's something we need to be meeting about. And when I gather that data, and if it's a very significant piece of information, we collect that and we present it to the IRC to check. And of course, there is a regulator on the IRC at that high level, and where we can discuss whether the piece of legislation will impact the occupational standard. So I think your concern is very valid, because the shelf life and the expiry date of occupational standards can become quite outdated very quickly with technology and regulations changing. So the secret is, when writing occupational standards, we try to in some way make the statement quite broadly. So for example, we might include, in accordance with current regulator standards. And so that kind of gives us an automatic, no matter what the standards are, and at airports correctly identified by the question asker was that they have to comply with these regulations that change on a continual basis. So for us in writing the occupational standards is not to get too specific with the wording, with the language, but to try and keep it open so that when they are applied in the industry, they can be automatically adapted and adopted by the trainer, who will of course be aware of those changes to technology. So for one example in relation to drone use was, there was at the time the regulator had a particular app which was about logging onto a particular drone app, and the drone app was called Can I Fly There app. So it was for users to check in to see if they can fly in a particular environment. Now within a couple of months, that actual app became extinct. CASA dropped it and introduced 4 more apps, which of course, if you've got something in language as very specific as Can I Fly There app, and it becomes outdated. So I learned a lesson in terms of being careful not to be too specific, but adherence to the regulations becomes important, but to make that as broad as possible so that when it is implemented, and if anything changes, it can be adopted really quickly.
Yes. Look, that's a great question, Mr. Tuan. And I think you'll remember when we did our design of our occupational standards, we looked at how often should these standards be reviewed. And we decided that it would be based on a risk profile. Where there were high risk elements to the job role, then those standards should be reviewed, frequently to reflect changes that are occurring. Or where there are sectors where there are dynamic change happening, and logistics is certainly one of them, then you should be looking at reviewing those occupational standards, you know, in a very short period of time, maybe over 1 year. And again, as Pashal has highlighted, as information becomes available, then we should look to modify our standards in response. Now, we have one more question to address, and then we'll conclude for today. And this is a question that's come from Ms. Furlong, and she's asking you, Pashal. It's a very interesting question. When collecting data about the airline industry from multiple sources, have you ever encountered a situation where the information did not match? And if so, how did your organisation handle this discrepancy in data?
Yes, data can be very tricky sometimes, and as you get lots of pieces of information, and I'm sure this would be very relevant to someone in the news agency compiling news stories about what is true and what is false and what is actual and what is a dream. It's actually a very interesting aspect. But luckily in our team, we will chase and confirm each piece of data to make sure that it is correct. And if something doesn't kind of feel right or look right or sound right, we won't discard it, but because it's important data and someone offers that, that's really, we will accept it, but we will check it. Yes, that does happen. I do have to follow up on information and changes from sources, but it's again a skill as in our team that we have, is that we have researchers who can chase that information, confirm it. For me, I will have a particular sources in aviation or defense who I can check the information with. And as I said in the case study, having key contacts around Australia in the main airports and developing relationships with the Technical Advisory Committee, I've got ready access to professionals in the industry who I can chat with. I can say, look, I've heard this piece of information. It doesn't quite sound right to me, but it could be true. What do you think? And so essentially it's confirming that data. The best and the fastest way to do that is to talk to people, and the right people of influence, people who are in the industry who can confirm that really quickly. But these things, all data is useful. That's the good thing about data. It is all useful, but it has to go through a filter.
Yeah, look, very good question, Fern, and I think goes to the hub of what we're going to look at over the next week, and particularly in module 3, is how do we sort this data? How do we verify it? We're going to have a lot of data coming in through these multiple data sources. We're going to have mixed modes of data collection. Some will be qualitative, some will be quantitative. How do we make sense of it, and how do we verify it? And what do we do with the outlier information that doesn't quite fit? Does it have value? Is it pointing to something that others are not seeing, or is it invalid? So we really need to be able to drill down. And as Pashal has highlighted, we use a variety of mechanisms. We're increasingly using what you would call a key informant approach. We take the information back to the sector. We use independent panels of experts who can give us an independent perspective, who are not linked to any company interests or any commercial interests, people out of academic institutions, independent experts from the sector. We've got a variety of mechanisms. It's a really good question, the validation and verification, because if we get it wrong, we risk undermining faith and integrity of our model. And in your evolution here in Vietnam, with the start of the model, we must ensure that it has integrity, because if it doesn't, then our stakeholders are not going to invest time in contributing to it or seeking benefit from it. So the integrity of our model is essential, and validation and verification of our data sources is essential to that integrity. So a very good question, Phil. Look, we'll conclude our training for today here. I did promise to show you a clip from the chairman of the Transport and Logistics Industry Reference Committee in Australia, Mr. Mark McKenzie. I'll do that first thing tomorrow morning, because I think what it does is it just distills how industry reference committees use the data and the sort of things that they're actually saying based on our industry intelligence work. So that'll be useful. We'll open with that tomorrow morning in our session. But I want to thank you all very much for your great participation today. I have to say that I'm really impressed after 2 days with the level of engagement that we've got from you. I did ask you yesterday, please be patient. Please stay the journey here, because we're going to get to some really detailed, interesting things, particularly as we move into next week and look at really the specifics of the data collection methods. And then when we look at how to analyze, interpret our data, I've got some things to share with you, some software to share with you that we are using in Australia, which I think will give you a sense of the whole picture now of what we're trying to create and how we can create it. So thank you so much for your active participation today. Thanks for your great questions. And I really look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow as we conclude our first module tomorrow on the introduction to industry intelligence. Tomorrow we have Kevin O'Leary joining us as a guest speaker. And Kevin is our, it's fair to say, probably a national guru on industry intelligence models. So he'll be here to answer some questions and to talk to you about how we do things in Australia. So I look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow. I wish you a good rest of today. And thank you once again for your fantastic and engaged contribution to our discussion today. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Tạm biệt.